Welcome everybody to the Bunnyhoppor Reviews Perils in Paradise Hearthstone review session. This time we're going to be having a look at Warlock cards. And just a reminder, all the Warlock cards can also go in Rogue. So this is something that we're going to have to keep in mind whenever we look at Warlock cards, except for the Tourist, of course. So we're going to have a look at the Tourist last. We're actually going to start with the other cards and then go to the Tourist at the end. I had a little bit of a look at this card before. We have a 1-mana 1/1 Demon Battlecry, summon 2 1/1 Fell Beast, deal 3 damage to your hero. One of the things that like Painlock kind of struggled with early is sometimes going wide. And this card is really good. This card is actually especially super good with Ziliax together. Like if you just think about this card just counting Ziliax by 3, it's super insane, right? It's like, it's really good on 1, but it's also going to be good later. It's just so much better than Flame Imp. The Painlock was kind of struggling with having good 1-drops, and this is a good 1-drop. And if you already have a board, like you can probably play this really cheaply and then just play the, like, maybe the 8-mana Ziliax. That is, the 8-mana Ziliax is the one that costs less for each other minion on board, and then gives +1/+1, something like this. So, I mean, you can play this with Shadow Step, but I'm not sure like how much Rogue wants to take damage. They already have a bunch of 1-drops, and the weird part about this card is like it doesn't really do anything else later in the game. The one thing that it does do quite nicely is, number one, it takes away board spaces for your Tess, and it activates Valorok. And I mean, maybe just this activating Valorok is like good enough to be played. You just play this on 1, you coin Valorok on 2, you win the game against some decks. That is possible, but I'm not 100% sure that's a thing. But this looks like a really good 1-drop for sure. And 1-drops usually don't have to be super good to be playable. And this, I think, has multiple upsides. And I think the Ziliax upside is really what pushes it over the line for me and making it really good. And we have the Fearless Flame Juggler, which is a 2-mana 1/1 Battlecry against stats equal to the damage your hero has taken this turn. I think this card isn't great. It's just like, if you want to take damage, you either have to have a dagger up as Rogue or like a shovel, and then you have to face tank a minion, so your opponent has to have a minion, and then you get this on board. I think the only way that this card would have been playable is they gave it the rush keyword. I wouldn't be entirely surprised if this had rush during testing at some point, and then it decided to took it away. But yeah, I think this card's unplayable, and I think it would have been playable if it had rush. Immenrix, thank you very much. Yeah, so that's why I don't think this card will like see any play. And then next up, we have 2-mana Eat the Imp. Destroy a friendly minion to draw 3 cards. Alright, hear me out. I think this effect is not worth it if we have to play it on cards. It's a 2-mana fire spell, by the way. I didn't say it. 2-mana fire spell, Eat the Imp. Destroy a friendly minion. This is not worth it if we're just playing it on regular 1/1s or 2/1s or 2/2s or 3/1s and stuff like that, because I don't think that's how these decks are supposed to work. But they're really good if we have some sort of Death Rattle synergy with some cards. I mean, drawing 3 cards is a lot for 2-mana, like, don't get me wrong. And some of these decks really want some card draw, especially like Painlock really doesn't mind drawing a few more cards to you, because you run out of cards pretty easily, and there's some bad cards in this deck. Somehow, this is like a feeling. This is like a... It's hard to reason really why I don't think this card is good, but I just don't feel like this will see play. But I mean, if you manage to have like a board buff deck where you can play eggs and new cards that profit off Death Rattles, I could see you play this. I also wonder if this card costs 1 mana during testing as well. But I think it's like a 2-star card. I think this is like a 4-star card, 1-star card, 2-star card. Alright, then we have Sacrificial Imp, which is a 3-mana 1/6 demon. which has the Death Rattle. If it's your turn, summon a 6/6 imp with taunt. It's kind of funny, we had cards like this before. We had a 3 mana 3/2 before that when it was your opponent's turn and died, was it spawned like a 2/2? We had a few cards like this and they were complete garbo. Like, they were really, really bad. Obviously, though, the outside here is a lot better. People arrive. Welcome. Everyone to this card review. Yeah, so I think this card is the 1/6 has a pretty nice body if you have some buffs with it. Like this deck, this works really well in like an egg deck, right? Because egg decks want to play buffs and they want to play cards that kill off your own minions. And this works really well in a deck like this. Right? Because you want to have like annoying bodies that you then want to buff. They're a little bit slow, but they do their thing over time. So the question is like, do we have enough buff cards right now in the game for this to work? And I don't know, 1/6 stats are like really not that bad in terms of being buffable. But the problem is this minion also doesn't die. If your opponent doesn't want to kill it and you don't kill it yourself, you're hitting him for 1 damage every turn. Your opponent just laughs at you. And like people point, people laugh. Also, I don't think this is something that Rogue would want to run. I would say this is probably a 2-star card. Sacrificial Imp. I just don't see it happening right now. But I'm interested because there's like a good amount of eggs in the game. And they're pretty interesting cards. I like egg decks. Maybe Jumper can cook up a nice egg omelet. And then we have 3 mana, Fell Spell, Health Drink, Lifesteal, deal 3 damage to a minion, 3 drinks left. This is interesting because this card used to exist at 2 mana, right? And it even exists right now in Hearthstone, I think, for 2 mana. Life Siphon, I think it's called. It's 2 mana, Lifesteal, deal 3 damage to a minion, right? And so it's cheaper, but obviously this card, like I always like to compare these drink cards that are like the bananas that we've seen in Hunter before. They are kind of like 3 mana, deal 3 damage to a minion with Lifesteal, draw a card, right? For the first 2 uses, it's kind of like draw a card. If this is something that you want to do. It's interesting that I like to play Rogue pretty defensively, and Rogue often has a little bit of a struggle with lifesteal, even though they have some, like, through the quick draw mechanic, they have some use for it. But I think the health drink could be something that could be played in Rogue, just to somewhat fill out the mid game, like maybe as a one-off or something like that. It's good for Cutlass Rogue as well. You know, that's 3 charges on a Cutlass. You don't have to discover the cards for your Cutlass, and your lifesteal, and you want to play like a more defensive gameplay anyway. Because you want to get your Cutlass big and hit your opponent, and that takes some time. So I think for Cutlass Rogue, this is a pretty good card. I kind of like this card. For Warlock itself, it's maybe interesting for giants, like for some sort of giant Warlock. But it's really interesting that we've seen even Warlock didn't 100% work. And Gen and Baku are leaving again, so even Warlock won't be a thing. I mean, obviously you couldn't play this in even Warlock, but what I'm trying to say is like even Warlock tried to do something similar, and it didn't really work as a deck. So I'm a little bit skeptical towards this one as well. Probably somewhat of like a 2 mana, 2 3-star card, like depending on the usage. Then we have Fellfire Bonfire, which is a 4 mana spell. It's a Fell spell school. Deal 4 damage to a minion. If it dies, your next Death Rattle minion costs 3 less, which is really interesting with the Queen. Because the Queen is like 8 mana, it's like a chess piece, 8 mana 6/4, I think. Death with taunt, Death Rattle, and then it summons 2 knights, which are like 4/6 taunts, or as a 4/4, okay. But it's like a 4/4 taunt that spawns 4/6s with taunt, and this curves pretty nicely into it, right? You play this on a minion, and then you can play this immediately, and you have like Yeah, you have some sort of synergy there. And we'll see also that this this has some synergy with Death Knight, but we'll get to that later a little bit. But I personally don't think Big Demon Lock probably is too impactful, because you play this, which is like not a great card, and you need to kill something on 4. I mean, I guess the card's not that bad. It's really not that bad. Like 4 damage for 4 mana with like a really pretty good upside. There might actually be a 3-star card. There might actually be a decent amount of synergy for this to be something that you really want to do. I'm skeptical. I'm very skeptical towards this card Felfire Bonfire working, but I let's be like slightly optimistic. Then we have 2 mana Announce Darkness. Replace your hero power and non-Warlock cards with Warlock ones. They cost 1 less. Okay, so if you're a rogue, you can just replace all your cards with Warlock cards and make them cost 1 less. And then you can announce some dankness. It's a 2 mana shadow spell, by the way. Announce Darkness. So you get a 1 mana life tap and a bunch of random Warlock cards. I mean, it's a good meme. It's obviously a 1-star card, but it's a good meme. 2 mana Cursed Souvenir. Give a minion is a shadow spell. 2 mana shadow spell, Cursed Souvenir. Give a minion +3/+3, and at the end of your turn, deal 3 damage to your hero. I looked at this card before, and I think this is pretty interesting together with a 1 mana imp, because the 1 mana imp just makes 3 bodies, and then you can buff one of them, and you take a bunch of damage, and you take them in instances of 3, which is pretty nice. So you get pretty easily up to 9, which gives you a 0 mana horror pretty quickly. So at the start of your turn, okay. That's even better, actually. At the start of your turn, deal 3 damage to your hero. See, I just think everything is end of turn. I didn't even read the card. Yeah, give a minion +3/+3, and at the start of your turn, deal 3 damage to your hero. That's obviously better, because if your opponent kills us, you never take the damage, which is pretty nice. Which is also pretty interesting. This can be somewhat useful. You put this on a minion, and then you breakdance the minion afterwards. You don't take the damage, and you get a +3/+3 buff. By the way. And it activates like some Valorok stuff. So I think this card has some decent potential. Like, especially the idea of using it with Breakdance and with activating for Valorok, I think is pretty interesting. Because there's some really niche cases where this could work. You would have to obviously build a little bit around with your deck, but like 2 mana cards are also nice if you want to just keep on playing the 2 mana 2/3. That gives you a coin if you have another 2 mana card in the hand. And obviously cheap cards are pretty nice to activate your Valorok. So I think this can probably see both use in Rogue and in Warlock, and I would rate it quite highly. And then we have Party Planner Vuna, which is a 6 mana 4/4. Battlecry, if you've taken 8 damage on your turn, summon Ouroboros, and Ouroboros is the snake from ancient Greek mythology that bites his own tail and represents the circle of life. So don't say you're not learning anything here. Which is an 8 mana 8/8 beast taunt. Death Rattle, give a minion in your hand. Death Rattle, summon your boss. So it's quite slow because you have to play the minion, then it has to die. Like you buff something in your hand, then you have to play it, then it has to die, and then you get it back. But yeah, like just having a 6 mana 4/4 that summons an 8/8 with taunt is pretty sick, and like the effect is pretty interesting. And some minions just need to be killed off. And well, like you often see Painlock doing like insane amounts of damage to themselves, like pretty early on, right? They often play their giants around turn 5 and then try to lock you out of the game with like Cult Neophyte, or I've seen people play Imprisoned Horrors on turn 3, you know? Turn 3, turn 4 is when you usually play Imprisoned Harrows, and for that you have to have taken 9 damage. So if you're taking something that's already giving you 9 damage to your face to give you a 4/4 for 0 mana, you might as well play this. So I think this card definitely goes in those decks. It's a lot slower. The deck usually tries to win the game before you can play this, but just because this is like, it's a ton of stats on 6, and it's also reoccurring if you like want to build boards later, I think that's pretty nice. The upside is good, and the decks can usually survive longer than you think. So I'd give this, I think this is like a 4-star card. Not super big fan of it in Rogue. Like, yeah, sure, it works in Rogue if you face tank things for 8, but face tanking things for 8 in Rogue often means you also die. The thing though is like, this is, even lock isn't the thing anymore as soon as the rotation comes out, right? Because Gen and Baku are leaving standard again. And in Wild, this stuff isn't powerful enough. Alright, and then last but not least, we have the Death Knight Tourist, which tells you the next destination of where we're going to go next, review-wise, is... actually, this could go in Cutlass Rogue as well, because you're face tanking everything with Cutlass Rogue. This probably goes into Cutlass Rogue. Forgot everything I said about this not being able to be played in Rogue. Yeah, you put this into your Cutlass Rogue, right? You face tank everything with the dagger because it has lifesteal, and that's like the whole point of this deck. You easily take 8 damage and you get a bunch more, and your deck's supposed to go super late game, so this makes a lot of sense actually. Yeah, let's put this in Cutlass Rogue. Alright, last but not least, 4 mana 4/4 Undead. Summoner Dark Marrow is a legendary card as well, so only one of them in your deck. Death Knight Tourist, that means if you put this in your deck, you can put all the Death Knight cards from this expansion into your Warlock deck as well, and says your Death Rattles trigger twice. After you play a Death Rattle minion, destroy it. So for example, if you played, like a combo that you could dream of is, you play Fellfire, Bonfire on a minion, it discounts your next Death Rattle by 3, and then you have a Sacrificial Imp in your hand, which when it dies summons a 6/6 with Taunt, and you play this Dark Marrow, and then because your Imp is discounted by 3, you can play the Imp and you get a 4 mana 4/4 and 2 6s with Taunt. That's a 3-card combo with a 4 mana setup turn. That is a lot. Like definitely triggering twice is kind of nice, and you're really gonna need that setup spell. I'm a little bit afraid that if there's not more setup spells to make other Death Rattles cheaper, I have no idea why I would be like, other than having the Death Knight Taurus, like having the access to the Taurus cards and putting it in my deck. I don't think this is something I want to build my deck around. Unless I can find other really good ways of making this like work, where I have other Death Rattles that I need to include, and I have other ways to cheat out Death Rattles. Because if I want to build boards like this early, I need to have made a setup before I can play this card. I'm not any fan of playing this on turn 8 and with an Imp and getting 2 6/6 taunts. In current Hearthstone, that's probably laughable. Yeah, I mean, you can't get Reska in it because she's from an older expansion. This is the first Taurus where I'm like really skeptical that this is playable at all. This will really have to depend on, like, do I want the Death Knight cards in my deck? And then I guess this is sometimes like a dead card where I can sometimes get an upside later on. But I feel like in terms of like building your deck around it, this is not something that you should do. But if it's a passive effect that sometimes helps your deck with something you're trying to do anyway, then I think sure, go ahead with it. So yeah, that's my summary of the Warlock cards. I think a little bit on the weaker end towards some of the things that I've seen so far. I really like Paladin so far, I really like Mage so far. Rogue's been a little bit of a mixed bag to me. And yeah, Warlock, I think, got some really strong support for Painlock. Like, if you're a Painlock enjoyer, this is really good. If you're anything but not a Painlock enjoyer, then you might be scratching your head a little bit. But We'll get into the Death Knight card next, and then we'll have a little bit of a look at if we can yoink something good from Death Knight to make this a little bit more fun.